Good morning, members of council, administration. We're here today to receive our award-winning budget, again, 7 years in a row. So nice to have everybody here. We'll call the meeting to order. And prior to that, we acknowledge that the ground on which we live in is the traditional territory of the Codwell First Nation of the Three Fires Confederacy and the original people of Point Pelee and Pelee Island and its surrounding lands and waters, and that of the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot peoples. We recognize and respect the First Nations who are stewards of the land and waters of Turtle Island and who have embraced a stewardship since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of other nearby First Nation communities and all original people across Turtle Island. We'll have a moment of silent reflection and then we'll stand for the singing of our national anthem. Thank you. Members of council, is there any disclosures of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof for items on the budget today? Seeing none, that'll be reflected in the minutes. Well, I think Joe's going to give a preamble before we start going. Mr. Militia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, welcome to the 2022 budget sessions. We expect to be here for today and tomorrow. We have a presentation to be delivered by our finance staff, as well as some of the other department heads and managers will be chiming in their respective departmental budgets. Again, the budget before you is a proposed municipal tax increase of 1.75%. When combined with the other county and education increases that we know of at this point, the overall estimate at this point is about 1.66%, but it's just slightly less than that given the county approved budget. So we encourage all questions as we go through the process. Again, we do have the budget document that we discussed over the next day and a half. As well, we have a few specialty reports that relate to the budget as it relates to the Petite Côte waterfront project, as well as the Malden Road project. So those are two other reports that relate to the budget that we'd like to bring council up to speed on with respect to the project, as there are two of the more significant capital projects that we have going on. With that, again, congratulations again to our finance staff. As the mayor alluded to earlier, we've had, again, been awarded the GFOA Budgetary Distinguished Budget Award. So congratulations to the finance staff, as well as those that contribute to the budget. Again, the last comment I'll make is that you'll note that this year's budget has a new look and feel to it. There's been a lot of work that's been done in the background by both Mr. Langlois, Mr. Farrow, and Ms. Hadre in the communications area to get to where we are today. This is kind of step one. We have some further enhancements that we'll be doing as part of the 2023 budget. But we are very proud of the budget you see before you. It's a very much an upgrade from the previous budgets in terms of the look and feel. So we hope that encourages some more understandability as we go through the process and as folks tend to start to leaf through. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Langlois, who will start off the presentations.
Thank you. Mr. Militia touched on a lot of points that I was going to bring up at the beginning, but I'm going to reiterate them. So the new budget document, it has a new fresh look to it. It's again phase 1 of 2. We're in the process of rolling out some new budget software, so the look will change a little bit next year as well. But it's a huge step forward. You know, I always talk about continuous improvement, and this is definitely one of those improvements. And many hours have been put into the new design and the new look. Again, I'd like to thank Mr. Ferraro and Mrs. Hodre. They've spent weeks and weeks and hours working on this document. Next, I just want to talk a little bit about the past 2 years with the pandemic. The 2021 and the 2022 budgets have definitely been a big challenge. Our goal these past 2 years have been to continue towards our strategic goals, the initiatives that we've started to implement, while keeping our tax increase as low as possible. And both years we've managed to accomplish this in our budgets. So that's a good accomplishment that everyone should be proud of. Next, I wanted to thank all the departments as well. It is tough. There is a lot of new service level requests and new service levels that we always want to implement. Over the past 2 years, trying to keep the tax rate low with the pandemic for our residents. The departments have worked with us, and we've really prioritized what has been the most important service level increases and priorities, and we've reduced the departmental budgets as much as possible, kept them as low as possible these past 2 years as we get through this pandemic. Excuse me. With that being said, I'd like to turn the budget presentation over to Mr. Ferraro to get started. The first part we're going to talk about is the front of file, and then we'll get into the departmental details a little bit later.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council. I'll begin with sharing the budget presentation slides. So can everyone see that? So we'll begin with an agenda for the budget presentation. Today's agenda includes an overview of the budget. We'll look at the overall tax levy, the tax rate. We'll look at the effect on the average home and the year-over-year change. We'll also discuss the impact reassessment briefly. We'll look at some inflationary and service level changes, as well as some factors and challenges. We'll also discuss funding sources and growth. We'll look at some regional comparators, and we'll discuss water and wastewater proposed rates as well. We'll then move on to an overview of the capital budget. This year, we will have Dale or myself, discuss the replacements and annual spending amounts included in the capital budget. And we will save the capital enhancements for more detailed discussion by each department head. At any time, if anyone has any questions, they can be asked during the presentation, or with respect to capital replacements, they can be asked to department heads during their presentation. We'll then move on. Dale will give a capital 5-year plan and forecast. And following that, we will move on to the departmental budgets. We will briefly discuss the operating budgets, as well as the goals from last year and the upcoming goals in the following year from each department head. And then they will also discuss the capital budget enhancements that they are proposing for the following year. Once that's been completed, we'll summarize the budget, of course, answer any questions that may come up. So the overall budget proposed budget has increased to $40.1 million from $38.4 million. This represents a rate of 1.0019, an increase from the 0.9847 from last year. This results in a 1.75% tax rate increase. It's important to note that with no assessment change this year on the vast majority of properties, it is expected that each property would have an increased tax bill of 1.75%. So what does this mean for the average home in the community? As we've heard, the average assessed value is approximately $250,000. Obviously slightly different than the current real estate levels that homes are selling for. But again, this value is based on the last reassessment that was done in January 1st, 2016. So what does that mean for the average home? That means a $43 change year over year, or slightly less than $4 a month. So a quick discussion on the MPAC and assessment update. Assessment update has been postponed for the years 2022 and 2023. That means there'll be no assessment update until 2024 at the earliest. And we're still waiting to hear back information from MPAC on that. There's been much discussion on increasing values and how that would affect the upcoming assessment and an individual's tax bill and the tax rate. And the overall budget is determined by town council based on the proposals that put forward by administration. With that, we raise enough taxes to cover that budget. Therefore, an individual's tax bill is the tax rate times assessment. I'd like to give a quick example of how assessment and tax rates affect individuals. So therefore, if the budget remains the same and two houses are valued equally, they could be valued at $250,000, then we multiply their assessment times the tax rate and receive their tax bill. If upon reassessment, both of those homes increase in value or double in value, and we still need the same amount of money to run the town for the year, the tax rate would then basically drop in half and their tax bills would be equal. So therefore, it is a mathematical equation, and if assessment increases, the tax rate would decrease as long as the budget stays the same.
I just want to touch a little bit on that as well. With the assessed values staying the exact same from year to year, the tax bill for every property in the town of LaSalle will increase by 1.75%. So historically, as Mr. Ferraro mentioned, when assessments increase, tax bills will increase by the rate plus the assessment increase. But since there is no assessment increase, every property in the town of LaSalle will increase by 1.75%, which is well below the current rate of inflation. As we know, it's approaching 5% for the year. So that's a good news story. Typically every year I do receive a handful of calls regarding residents that might be upset with their tax bills. And that's generally due to the fact that's even in years when we've had a 0% tax rate increase. And that's generally due to the fact that their assessed values have increased higher relative to everyone else. Last year with the 1.9% increase that we had, I hadn't received one call. That's because it was in line with inflation. Everyone received that exact same increase. So that's the same with this year. This year we're coming in even a little bit less, 1.75%, which is well below the rate of inflation.
So next we'll move on to a summary of the changes year over year that equal to $1.7 million. We have, as we've heard, inflationary pressures, labor and benefits, contractual increases that apply to inflationary pressures. We also have some operating cost increases. In particular, insurance has increased significantly for the upcoming year, as well as some software costs, as well as garbage collection and disposal. We also have inflationary increases on our contributions to capital. And these have been offset by increased revenue, which relates to the corporate allocation of overhead to water and wastewater. Police services is another component of the budget where the changes are over $500,000. And this relates to the contractual increases as well as the proposed additional 2 constable positions, which will be discussed further in the departmental presentations. The long-term capital, the proposed increase is $300,000 this year, equivalent to last year. Previously, it had been $600,000. Growth in service level increases include funding for master plans, including the waterfront, as well as the fire master plan. These have been offset by increased revenue of $290,000, which relates to an increase in the supplemental levy revenue that we are expecting. We have seen a significant amount of growth in construction in the area, and with, for example, developments on 6th Concession, Sprucewood, some near Town Hall, and some in Wyoming. So therefore, we feel confident that we can increase this budget line an additional $290,000 to help offset the inflationary pressures that we are experiencing.
Yeah, I'm just going to go in a little bit more detail on the inflationary changes at a high level. We will get into even more detail when we get to the departmental budgets. Just starting with wages and benefits. Basically, inflationary changes are changes that are really out of our control if we want to maintain the same levels of service. Prices go up. We've seen that increasing. We're going to have a slide a little bit later just discussing this challenge, which is becoming larger in recent years. But wages and benefits, every year our benefits, the rates go up, the costs go up. Our contract prices go up as well. Inflation on existing capital contributions. We've increased our contribution to capital reserves by 2%. I'm going to have a whole presentation on this later as well. Garbage collection and disposal. Before we received our price that we detailed in the report at yesterday's council meeting, we did budget for an increase. That price has come in significantly higher. As mentioned in the report, we're going to budget for that variance through our tax stabilization reserve for 2022. Once we receive the RFPs back and the results, we will adjust our budget accordingly for 2023 based on the successful bidder. Insurance, again, there was a report yesterday on our insurance, which is going up just over 13%, which again is, believe it or not, one of the lowest increases in the region. Other inflationary items is very minimal. They kind of offset. There's some on both the revenue side and on the expense side. Overhead allocation increase, that pertains to an increase in our overhead allocation to the water and wastewater budget. We haven't reviewed this in a number of years. I think since 2015. Since then, we've added another customer service rep, which is basically dedicated to the collection of tax and water bills, but we required that additional position when we did take over the utility billing for water and wastewater bills. So we factored that into the equation. There's been other hires, new CETs and whatnot, that a portion of their duties pertain to water and wastewater. So we've increased that overhead allocation as a result. The last figure is an increase in surplus revenue. So over the past number of years, as there's vacancies in positions and it takes time to fill, there has been a surplus resulting at the end of the year. So in order to help reduce our tax rate, we have budgeted for a small surplus for the year, and we're hoping to continue that moving forward. There's always a space between people leaving us, whether they retire or go to another municipality or whatnot. It takes time to replace that position. So we factor that into our budget. Next, growth and service level increases. As I mentioned, we've really cut back on proposing service level increases. We've cut many in half. We haven't brought many forward. We're going to have a slide on that later as well. But at a high level, the service level increases, the master plan buildup, which is primarily used for the Small Coast Waterfront project right now. We've increased that by 300,000. Last year, I think we increased by 200,000. Our original plan was to increase by 400,000 to 500,000 a year. So we've reduced that to help keep the tax rate lower. Our fire master plan buildup, we continue with that. That's a longer term plan. We haven't cut that one back. That's $200,000 a year that we've dedicated to build up for the fire master plan. Our storm sewer maintenance. Storm sewer, as we all know, that's becoming a bit larger and larger issue with the abnormal rainfall events that we have and whatnot. So we have increased that service level and put some more funding towards storm sewer maintenance. Alternate parking implementation from yesterday's report that was approved by council, option B. This is the $10,000 build up for that service level increase. And then last, increase, this is more of a growth related increase, but the increase in the supplemental levy. So in recent years, we've had a boom in the market, and as a result, our supplemental levy dollars have increased as construction's been increasing. So this year we have brought that increase to our actual figures. I think it's at 850 or 900,000 now that we've budgeted. And that's our actuals the past number of years. So this is a one-time increase for the 2023 budget, and going forward, this increase will not occur. This is a one-time increase to help with our budgeted figures. Next, long-term capital. This is our buildup. There will be a detailed report on this a little later on our longer-term financial plan. Again, this has been cut by 50% the past 2 years, 2021 and 2022, to assist with keeping our tax rate lower through the pandemic. Our original plan is to dedicate 2% annually, which at the time was 300,000 equaled 1%. It's a little closer to $400,000 now, equals 1% tax rate increase, but we have reduced that in half just to keep our tax rate low. But we still want to move forward. We still want to continue to build up our capital reserves.
So this graph shows where our budget dollars are spent by service or category. As you can see, a significant portion is transferred to capital and reserves, and this is used to fund the many capital projects that we have ongoing, as well as replacements and annual spending and enhancements that are planned for the upcoming years. It also funds the master plans funds that are put away from master plans is included in this as well. The next largest section is our emergency services. Combined, they are 28%. Alone police and police services is at 19%, and fire services at 9%. The dark blue on the bottom is our debt payments, and they're at 6% of our expenditures. Garbage collection and disposal likely to rise, more likely to be equal 5% rather than 4%, based on the recent changes. Fleet and facilities, 2 areas of public works, combined to be 10% of the overall expenditures. And that leaves the balance of other departments, administrative departments, the net budget of culture and rec, as well as the other public works departments such as roads and parks operations, to account for about a quarter of our operating budget. So a few areas contribute significantly to the expenditures of the annual budget. This next slide discusses where growth comes from. And this slide that we've shown for many years, and it illustrates where earlier on, beginning in 2010, the red bars represent the tax rate increases that occurred. The light blue represents the increase in funding from assessment increases on existing properties. And the dark blue represents the growth that the communities had. As you can see, as we trend from 2016 forward, a significant amount of dark blue has been added and much less red up until the last 2 years, where we had no assessment increase on existing properties, and that was the gap there was made up from basically tax rates as well as some growth. Growth peaked in 2019 at over $1.4 million and has been steady in the last 3 years at approximately $800,000 to $900,000 a year. But certainly we can see the effects of growth and where our funding comes from. This next slide is intended to illustrate growth, some of the benefits of growth, and some of the costs of growth as well. On the left side, we see construction of new homes, which includes water mains and sidewalks and roads, as well as neighborhood parks. At some point, we'll have to repair or replace those services, so sidewalks, roads, as well as the water mains, etc. So we'll have to save for those repairs as growth occurs. In addition, we incur growth costs such as clearing snow from new streets, salting new streets, as well as increased activity at the Volmer. So we are incurring costs for programming and things of that nature. On the other side, there's the benefits of growth. The benefits of growth include spreading costs of town-wide events over a larger population base or larger assessment base. So for example, some of our night markets, the cost is split over a larger assessment base or a larger population, as well as our holiday light display and our heritage nights. In addition to that, we have infrastructure, the Volmer building itself. We still have one building at this time to service more population and more assessments. And at the bottom of that picture, we see some IT infrastructure, which we know how critical that has become in the last few years. So we spread the cost of IT infrastructure over a larger population or assessment base. So both the cost of growth as well as the benefits of growth. This brings us to this next slide. What we've done here is from 2 slides ago, it's the same slide, but we've eliminated growth from 2016 forward. And we replaced it with alternative sources of funding, which would be a tax rate increase. So you can see how significant the red bars become absent any growth in the community over the last 5 to 6 years. In fact, without growth in the last 5 to 6 years, we are looking at basically a 20% tax rate increase would have been necessary to achieve the same budgets that we have at this time. So certainly growth has played a significant portion in the community, and it's also allowed us to stabilize the tax rate. Throughout our budget document on pages 27 to 37, we discuss in detail a number of budget factors and challenges. Those include assessment mix and tax ratios, building activity, aging infrastructure. As well, I just discussed a little bit about growth and funding sources. And next we'll discuss a few items based on inflation, as well as formula-based grant funding from upper levels of government.
So this inflation's definitely over the past year become a larger challenge. It has moved up on the challenge scale. These here charts we've put in, it's something that everyone can relate to. The viewing audience, our public viewing audience, they can relate to these prices. We put the price of some produce on the increase year over year. You look at chicken, it went up 8%, beef 14%, dairy over 4%, closer to 5%. These are prices that everyone can relate to. The fuel prices, we all know, when we fill up, it's actually, this is probably a little bit lower. It's been over $1.40 a liter recently. These are prices that everyone can relate to. Like the municipality we don't buy chicken or beef or whatnot, but the same is happening with the cost to run municipal services. The prices are accelerating at an abnormal level. The consumer price index is approaching 5% on the year. So this is definitely a major challenge if we want to continue to provide the services that we continue to provide. With the costs going up, we've kept the budget at 1.75% for the 2022 budget, but if costs continue to rise into 2023, if we want to maintain the same levels of service, this is something we really cannot control. We cannot control the prices of goods that we purchase and services that we purchase as well. So it's just something we're keeping a close eye on, and we're looking at any efficiencies that we can find to help offset. This next slide here, I know it's Councillor Akpata's one of his favorite slides. We include this every year. This is an example of a municipal cost. The cost of hot asphalt mix. So for resurfacing our roads and whatnot. We put in a 20-year chart here. So for the first 5 or 6 years, the cost of hot asphalt was pretty much in line with the consumer price index, but since then it has drastically risen well above the consumer price index, and it's continuing to rise. This brings us all the way to 2020. I'm sure 2021, once we get those figures, it'll be even more aggressive. So these are definitely pressures. You know, if without raising the contribution to capital, that just means that we can pave less roads. That's the offsetting formula. If we don't increase the transfer to capital in the same proportion that these costs are going up, we can do less. Not really much else we can do. Next slide. A little bit of technical difficulties here for a second. I can share my screen. Just hold on 1 second. Apologize. You back? Okay. I'll share my screen. Okay, I apologize for that. It's little technical difficulties there. So continuing on with inflationary pressures, these are a couple more municipal costs that the general public can't relate to personally, but these are definitely some pressures that we're feeling the municipality here. As we mentioned yesterday, insurance did go up 13% for 2022. The garbage collection, we've budgeted for an inflationary increase, but as we know, it's going up over $1 million for 2022. We'll see what the RFP comes back in January for 2023, but this is definitely a significant price increase and challenge. In speaking with our service provider, their costs are going up over 10% a year the past 5 years. And then garbage disposal, those prices are also increasing quite significantly. So these are there's definitely many challenges that we are facing here at the municipality. Next, we're going to look at grant funding. So LaSalle, we do receive grants. These are formula-based grants. We have application-based grants and formula-based grants. The formula-based grants are the grants that we receive every year based on a formula. The OMPF funding is a grant that we do not qualify for. There's several different factors in calculating this. And a portion is median income, the percent of the population that's rural versus urban. And given these factors, the town of LaSalle does not qualify. All the other municipalities do qualify. Tecumseh even, they get a slight little bit of funding. You can see at the bottom of their graph there. Unfortunately, LaSalle does not receive any funding for that. The Canada Building or Community Building Fund, that is the federal gas tax funding. It has been renamed recently, so that's what it's called now. We do receive funding for that. In 2021, actually, this figure is doubled. There was a one-time doubling of this funding that we've received. So if you actually cut the red in half, we are lower than Tecumseh with our funding overall. Then there's the OCIF funding. That's another formula-based funding. As you can see, we get a very small portion compared to the other municipalities there. When you do look on a per capita basis, you take the funding divided by our population, LaSalle does receive the lowest funding. Now, I just want to point out that it kind of does work like income tax. So some of these formulas. So the more money that someone makes, the higher their tax bracket is in personal taxes and the higher money that they pay in taxes. From a municipal level, the higher the median income of a municipality, that factors into a formula and the municipality actually receives less funding. So if you think about it individually, if you make higher than average income and you live in a municipality with that the average household earns more income, you're actually getting hit double because the taxes that you're paying is higher and the taxes that you're receiving is also lower. So it's kind of a double whammy, unfortunately. Now, I just wanted to mention that we have met with senior levels of government earlier in the year. We met with the Minister of Finance, our mayor, and some of our administration to talk about some of our concerns and the challenges that we face and with the different calculations and the fairness. So we've recently received a letter that they are changing the calculation for the OSIF funding, but we'll have to see exactly how that works out to see if it works in our favor or not. But okay, Mr. Farrow, he's going to talk a little bit about our application-based grants and our status with those.
So given our low per capita formula-based grants, as well as our low formula-based grants, administration has taken many opportunities to apply for application-based grants and spends quite a bit of time trying to be successful in these grants to lessen the burden on our tax rate. So in 2021, we've been successful on quite a few application-based grants, and I'd just like to take a few moments to list some of these. For example, the Rural Economic Development RED grant relating to the capital expenditures at the Holiday Nights and Lights display, the Canada Summer Jobs Program, the Reconnect Festival and Event Program, Municipal Modernization Grant, which will be used to increase the electronic capabilities of the Finance and Building Department. A very large grant we received relating to the Event Center renovations. We received $750,000 from the Canada Community Revitalization Fund. We've also received a grant from My Main Street Community Activator Program relating to the programming costs of the Holiday Lights and Holiday Nights programs that we have ongoing. We've also received 2 grants relating to fire services, the Fire Safety Grant and the Enbridge Safe Community First Responder Grant. And lastly, we received 2 grants relating to policing, a grant relating to community safety, as well as a grant relating to court transportation. So despite the fact that we get lower grants on a formula base from upper levels of funding, we have been successful in applying for numerous grants and receiving well over $1 million in 2021 of grant funding. So I'll continue. Our next slide is a brief comparison from last year on where the town of LaSalle fits compared to our regional neighbors with respect to property taxation. As you can see from the slide on the left, including county education taxes, the town of LaSalle still is basically right in the middle of our regional neighbors with respect to municipal taxes that we control, county taxes, and education taxes. So again, we are about 3254 is the combined total. And we compare these properties, we compare an average property across the entire region using the same property value as well as the same water and wastewater usage in the upcoming graph. So this is using the same assessment value across each community and determining where we fit in comparison to our neighbors. On the right, we have what is an affordability graph, which shows our taxes divided by median household income. And as you can see, when you include that household income factor, we move down to the lower end of the comparison chart. This next slide is a summary of our operating budget. We discussed earlier where our operating budget is spent by category. In this or service, this has to do with also by salaries versus transfer to own funds and program services. So this is another way of looking at all of our expenditures. On the right side, we see where does our funding sources come from. Predominantly, our revenue comes from property tax, but also water and wastewater revenue, as well as some departmental revenue and corporate revenue. On the bottom right, we can speak to an overall summary of our operating budget. The general expenditures are $52 million, less our departmental revenue comes down to $45 million, less our corporate revenue comes down to $40 million, which is what the tax levy is intended to raise. This next slide shows the proposed water and wastewater rates. Water and wastewater rates for the upcoming year. On the left illustrates our changes year over year. We're proposing a water main replacement charge and wastewater capital replacement charge of $4.50 per quarter increase. And we are proposing water consumption increase of 2 cents over and above the $1.12 from last year, which is roughly in line with our tax rate increase of 1.75%. What does that mean to the average consumer last year with respect to water and wastewater? As you can see on the right side, the blue dots represent the cost of 2021 and the red dots 2022. In total, the average user last year would have paid $918.48. And with the proposed increases, that average user would pay $964.56. Again, this is less than a $4 a month increase year over year. Where do we compare in the county when it comes to water and wastewater charges? This is based on last year's rates. And as you can see on the wastewater side on the left, we are the second lowest on the average consumption. And similarly on water, we are the second lowest on the average consumption. So in both cases, we are very close to the bottom, significantly lower than the higher communities in our area. In fact, you can see that on wastewater, we are less than half than a few of our comparator communities in the area. A little bit closer on the water side, but still significantly lower when it comes to the average water charge on a home. This chart here is a chart that is prepared by the treasurers group in the community, and it illustrates where the average assessed value home and the average water and wastewater user, if you combine all those factors, how do we all compare with each other? As you can see in 2021, LaSalle was the fourth lowest community when including all three of those factors. I think it's important to note that if council approves the proposed budget increase and the proposed water and wastewater increases, and all other municipalities increase at 0% for all three of those, LaSalle would still remain right where it is right now in comparison to the other communities. So that is LaSalle 2022, where that arrow is. If council approves the rates that have been recommended, we would still be in the middle of this comparative graph. That concludes the majority of our operating summaries, and now we'll move on to capital unless there's any questions.
Any council questions? Councilor Reno, and then after questions, we'll just take a 10-minute break.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tano, I don't know if we can back up the slides about 5 or 6. You had one there about affordability, and it had some, there we go. So showing LaSalle as being the third lowest on the affordable side, does that mean we're actually third most affordable or third least affordable?
That would make us the third most affordable.
Thank you for the clarification. That's all.
Any other questions? Back, thanks. before. Okay, welcome back. We'll reconvene the budget meeting, and Mr. Tano Ferrero's up.
Thank you, Mayor Bondi. The next slide we'll discuss is our capital budget. The capital budget for 2022 is proposed at $32 million. Within our budget document, it can be found on pages 178 to 201. The capital budget is broken down into categories similar to last year, including previously approved budgets that are not significantly completed, annual spending amounts such as mill and pave, replacement and repair items, enhancements, grant dependent, and items that are not recommended. With respect to the enhancements, we will leave that to department heads to discuss in more detail during their presentations, but I'll briefly go through the annual spends and the repair and replacement items. But certainly if there's any questions on those, they can be asked at this time or to specific department heads at the time of their presentation. So on the left, we have some photos and some examples of some of the annual spends that that are part of the annual budget. They include the annual IT software and hardware expenditures, and to keep our IT infrastructure up to date and replace older items. The mill and pave and enhanced mill and pave to keep our roads in the condition that we expect them to be, in safe conditions, as well as an annual pedestrian safety allowance. On the right-hand side, we have a number of replacements that are proposed in the 2022 capital budget. These are items that have reached the end of their useful life, and it's more advantageous to replace them and to spend time and money repairing them. Also, any delay in replacing some of these increases the risk of downtime should something happen to the equipment. Some examples are the town sail shades outside town hall, some Vollmer equipment, including the refrigeration equipment, a snow plow, some vehicles, as well as 2 patrol cars. As I mentioned, department heads will speak more to enhancements. As you can see on the left, we have proposed Vollmer tennis courts in the enhancement column, and we'll discuss later. On the right-hand side, we have some examples of some grant-dependent projects that we may come back to council with for approval should we be successful in some grant applications. They include replacing some rooftop AC units at the Vollmer, as well as some water main work that's shown on the right in various parts of the town.
So quickly, before I get into the 5-year capital plan, I just have a couple slides on community service level requests. So just before I get into this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, our goal right now during this pandemic is to keep tax rates as low as possible while continuing the projects towards accomplishing the projects that we've already started and the initiatives that we've already started regarding our strategic plan. We're still trying to accomplish those, but to keep the tax rate at a lower level at this point in time, we are not rolling out any of the service level requests. So to name some requests that we've received this year and sometimes in past years, there is a request to establish a heritage committee. There's been a request to spend a couple $100,000 a year on planting more trees. We do have a budget for this that we are gradually working towards increasing, but we have received a request to significantly increase that all at once. There's always a request for a Santa Claus parade, fast tracking accessibility related initiatives, more trails, more sidewalks, more soccer fields. We want some residents want soccer field lighting, fast track the Small Coast Waterfront project to complete everything all at once, building larger playgrounds on some of the parks that we have. There's a lot of other requests that come in throughout the year, but these are just to name a few. So obviously, if we roll out some of these requests or any, they all cost money, whether directly or indirectly, you know. I have residents, for example, I'm going to speak a little bit about establishing a heritage committee. You know, the one resident that's proposing that we establish one, you know, they're saying, you know, it's, you hire a consultant and it's $10,000 a year. There's a lot of indirect costs with many services that we have. Indirect costs can be staff time internally that we have to spend dealing with the consultants, setting up meetings, attending meetings. That all comes at a cost. Eventually, with existing resources that we have, I say, you know, the glass, if it's 95% full, sometimes some of these new service level increases will overflow the glass. There's too much duties for one person to perform, at which point we need to hire additional staff members. So that's an example of an indirect cost, where it really is a cost to the town if we have to hire new positions. And then some of these, like the tree planting example, just generally will cost a lot of money right away. If we do plant more trees, it costs money. So, you know, when there is a request or someone who's unhappy with the service that we provide, those are the people that generally will call council or even administration and call and complain. They're the louder residents. When people are satisfied with what we have, typically, sometimes you'll get a call saying everything's great, but typically they're satisfied and they don't call or say anything. So we look at service level requests as a whole. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. How do we address these service level requests? Well, it's a balance of priorities. You know, we look at which requests benefit the entire municipality, not just a handful of people who would like them. You know, if we're going to spend $100,000 on something that's going to satisfy 5 people versus $100,000 that's going to satisfy 15,000 people, half the population, we're going to prioritize the projects that will satisfy more residents. You know, which we also look at which utilize the most resources, whether direct or indirect, staffing, financial resources, costs of purchasing goods and services, time. Time is money. As I mentioned, how much does the request cost? And then lastly, does it align with the town's strategic plan? If it's a request that, you know, it's out there and it doesn't tick any of the 5 boxes of the 5 large goals, that falls down on the priority list. So all the requests that we've received in the past year, we have not brought those forward in this budget unless we've already started them, or if it's a major issue, such as the storm drainage maintenance. We're trying to prevent backups and basements from flooding and whatnot. So that's kind of where we stand on some of these service level requests. And, you know, once this pandemic's done, or if it ever finishes, or and we're ready to move forward, we will look at addressing some of the new service level increases and including them in the budget. But everything costs money, and as a result, the tax rate increase will increase as a result. So just moving along, there is a report for council. One of the reports on the agenda, the capital plan from 2022 to 2027. The next 15 slides or so I'm going to walk you through that report. I know it is a detailed report that is lots of charts, lots of graphs. There's a lot of information. So I'm going to walk through some of those charts, graphs, and explain them in a little bit more detail. And as always, if there's any questions, please feel free to stop me and ask at any point. So this here chart is actually from the Ontario guidance for asset management plans that was released, I think, in 2014 or 2015. It's a pretty interesting chart, and it's the average Ontario per capita in net public capital stock. So basically what the story says is in the 1950s through to the mid 70s was the era of visionary investment. high growth, baby boomers, population expanding, a lot of immigration coming into Canada and Ontario. The focus was on building new infrastructure, new streets, new subdivisions to accommodate all this growth. During that era, growth was happening so quickly that people were not thinking about eventually replacing those assets that were being built. It was purely on building new items. So fast forward to the mid-70s all the way up to the year 2000. This is called the era of neglect. This is speaking in averages, not every municipality, but on average, there was a big recession in the 1980s. The growth slowed down, immigration slowed down. So basically what happened, there was not a lot of growth happening. And there was still, the focus was more on saving money, and there was not money being put away to replace assets either. It was just more stagnant. Fast forward to the year 2000 to present, what's happening is all the assets that were built during the era of visionary investment are starting to reach the end of their useful lives. So what's happening now is we're beginning to have to replace those assets. And because no funding historically was put away to replace, we are having to fund that now, build up that funding now. And as we continue to grow, especially in recent years, we are paying for development. That's through development charges, growth pays for growth, but we're also thinking forward with our asset management plans and putting money away for the items that are being built today to eventually replace them in the future. So we're basically being hit twice. We're paying for the replacement of older assets, plus we're putting money away to replace the assets that are currently being built. We're learning from the past. So that's kind of what's happening. And those are some challenges, not only in LaSalle. We're actually in pretty good shape compared to a lot of municipalities, as you'll see during this presentation. But it is I'd say a worldwide problem. So our capital financial planning consists of a three-part approach. Every year we present council with our annual capital budget, which is approved. This year it's approximately $32.5 million. Now that isn't all going to be spent in 1 year. That involves some of the larger projects that are going to be spent over a number of years. Then we look at our 5-year capital plan, which we're going to go through in a little more detail throughout this presentation. We're looking at a buildup of $50.4 million annual allocation for capital replacement over the next 5 years. And that's the reallocation to reserves and contributions, the buildup for those capital replacement projects. And then we have our long-term capital plan, which is our asset management plan. Now, our asset management plan, it's newer. We've been working on that the past number of years, continually improving it as we get more data. But that basically consists of all town assets included in this asset management plan with their condition ratings, how long they're going to last approximately, and then how much money we should be putting away each year to replace them and building up towards that. So right now we're at $14.1 million. And as you'll see in a couple slides, the annual replacement that we should be putting away annually is $21.2 million. So a little bit of history. So 5 years ago, Mr. Militia and myself, we did present the first 5-year capital plan related to the asset management plan. There's been many capital plans before that, but this is just a new approach that we've taken. And this just kind of outlines some of the progress. So from our actual capital funding, which was $6.7 million in 2016, fast forward to the 2022 proposed budget is just under $14.1 million. That's a huge accomplishment by our municipality, very significant and something we should all be proud of. That increase consists of, there is some government funding that we've received, some OCIF funding that did increase by $695,000 more during the 2017, 18, and 19 years. Our tax related increase, that 2% that we dedicated each year, that resulted in $4.2 million. There's also been some other funding that we've received, some recapture calculations and whatnot that we've dedicated to that has really helped us out. And then our user fees increase, which is $2.5 million. That's our wastewater and water buildup of our fixed fees. So that's brought us up. We've increased our capital contributions by just shy of $7.4 million over the past 5 years, which is a huge accomplishment. So the other side of the equation, though, if you look at our infrastructure funding gap. So I'm going to explain how this chart here works. So if you look at 2015, that's the year before we started rolling out the previous 5-year capital plan. So that year, to replace all of our existing assets was approximately $14 million. That was our goal, which we did accomplish. Actually, looking at the last slide, we did accomplish our ultimate goal during that time period of fully funding. If the value of our assets did not change from 2016, 2015 through to 2020, we'd be fully funded. But what has happened in the meantime, you can see that gold line, that's our funding. That's the money that we've been building up and putting away each year. You can see that really climbing over the years. So the dark blue is the replacement value that we need in 2015. The light blue is new assets that we've included in the calculation that weren't included before. An example is trees. Street trees, believe it or not, are a capital asset. They eventually will need to be replaced. And drainage. We have storm sewers, but the drainage was not included either. And that's not really, it's hard to make it a tangible asset, but over time, the town's portion of drainage that is not charged to residents individually, we need to pay for that. So we factored that into the plan. The red is new assets purchased by the town. So an example would be the marina building at Front Road. Eventually that building will need to be replaced. As we replace water mains and roads, the cost at which we replace them is a lot higher than their original cost historical value. So we've factored that in, that the replacement now has increased the replacement cost. So that makes up the red in the graph. The gray, that's assets donated to the town. Now, basically what happens is if the new subdivision is built by a developer, they pay for building that subdivision. Once the houses are built and the residents move in, it becomes property of the town of LaSalle because those residents are now paying their taxes. So eventually we need to build up to replace those assets, the water pipes in the ground, the road, the sanitary mains and whatnot, the street lights and signs. So we need to put money away annually to eventually replace those. And that's the growth that we talk about. And then the dark blue at the top, that is inflation. Now that's very significant increase, the highest increase, but inflation's typically increased up to 22% a year. This is a lot higher than that. Infrastructure related assets have increased significantly higher than 2% per year over the past 5 to 6 years. And we have gotten more accurate costing that we've put in our asset management plan. So that's another significant increase. So as you can see, the funding gap in 2016 was $8.9 million. The funding gap has been reduced to $8.2 million. And as I said, if none of these factors, if inflation didn't exist, we'd be pretty close to fully funded. But because costs are continuing to go up, and 2021 is going to go up even higher at a more aggressive rate. So that funding gap continues. That's why we really need to make sure, we've been building up that 2% for inflation every year. And we've also been increasing that 2% tax rate increase every year, but that's getting eaten up a lot by inflation as well. So we need to continue to build our capital reserves so that we can maintain the same service levels that we have here in the town. So this next slide, it's a big, complicated slide. It's in the report, but I'm gonna kind of break it down and kind of explain it here. So if you look at the first column, these are the different categories of our assets. included in our asset management plan. The first column, the original capital cost. So that's the cost that we purchased every asset in the plan at. Some of these costs for our storm system, for example, and even some of our roads could be 40 years old. So our costs, if you look in today's dollar value, if you look at the 2020 projected replacement value, that is significantly higher than the original capital cost column, because that's due to inflation and prices increasing over the years. Accumulated amortization is just the drawdown in value over the years, the depreciation that builds up over the years as it ages. The net book value is kind of how much of the useful life is left of that asset. The average used to date. So that's kind of how much of the life of each asset has been used up already, how far along we are on average. The next column, the annual amortization expense. So that basically is, I'll use an example of a car. If we bought a car 10 years ago for $20,000 and it's going to last 10 years, the amortization would be $2,000 a year. Fast forward to today, to replace that same car is $30,000. That's inflation, $10,000 of inflation. If we put away the $2,000 a year, we'd only have $20,000. We wouldn't have enough money to buy a new car. So that's kind of an example of, if you look at the annual amortization expense versus the next column over, which is the annual amortization based at replacement value. That's the difference. The first column would be the $2,000 a year put away versus the other column would be the $3,000 you need to put away if you actually wanted to buy the same car today at $30,000. So our goal, our ultimate goal, is to get to the replacement value, which is $21.2 million. If we were fully funded today, we'd need to be putting away $21.2 million a year away to replace all of our assets. So the contributions based on the reallocation approval, the buildup every year that we've been building up, we've reallocated those to the appropriate reserves to kind of balance ourselves by a different category. If we reallocate what we've built up, we've listed the funding and the funding sources for each different category to make sure that we're kind of even throughout. One item would like to mention is facilities. The annual funding is less compared to some of the other infrastructure. And the reason for that at this point is our buildings are fairly young, with the oldest being the Vollmer Recreation Center. In 2028, the debt will be fully paid off for the Vollmer Center. And what we propose to do at that point in time is reallocate that payment, that savings from that debt being paid off, contributing that to the facilities reserve. So as that building ages and other buildings around town start to age, we do have money that will be funding that we can use to start replacing the roofs and whatnot as they require it. Moving along to the next slide. What affects annual replacement requirements? So as I mentioned, growth. As we have more subdivisions and assets, we eventually need to replace those. Inflation, the actual cost to replace the assets versus the historical cost. That's an item we cannot control, very difficult to control. Third, the useful life of the asset. That's partially controllable. I will go through some examples later in the presentation. Another item I haven't included on here is senior levels of government funding. The more we receive, the less of the burden on the tax rate. So it's very difficult to control that as well. So going into a little bit more detail, inflation. This here shows the inflation over the past 6 years. I took the average from 2015 to 2020 because when I was creating the slide, the government website had been compromised and I wasn't able to access the increase year over year, but I could see the total amount, which I just took an average. So consumer price index is the blue, which and the green is our annual capital contribution for inflation, the 2% that we increase each year. So you can see up to 2020, we're pretty much in line with the consumer price index. The problem with the consumer price index is that's the average increase for every single good and service in Canada. It's not specific to infrastructure. If you look at the IPPI, I didn't write down what that stands for, and the NRCPI, that's the non-residential construction price index. Those are more related to infrastructure and buildings and categories included in our asset management plan. So historically, the IPPI is pretty consistent up to 2020, and the NRCPI that increases at an average of about 3.5% a year. But if you look into 2021 with inflation rates skyrocketing, that is definitely a huge challenge and a huge problem if we want to maintain the same level of service. We cannot control this. The only thing that we can control is how much we increase our tax rate and how much we contribute to capital. If we were to meet these increases, our tax rate would be probably about a 5% increase this year. So we just have to keep that in mind going forward. Hopefully it slows down going into 2022, but from the economic projections that and reports that I've been looking at, this is expected to continue for some time. Next, we're going to look at growth. I presented this when I released the budget, but I'm going to present it again because I think it's a good slide. So this here is a picture of the Seven Lakes area about 5 or 6 years ago. There was a little bit of development that started on St. Francis Crescent. Fast forward to the latest aerial photo, which is 2021, and it's a huge subdivision with hundreds of houses. And this is only one area of the town. As I mentioned earlier, growth is, as Tano mentioned, growth is a great thing. It does help with our bottom line and helps spread some of the costs amongst assessment. But with growth, in addition to the operating cost increases that Tano mentioned, there's capital increases. There's new roads, there's new storm sewers, water mains, wastewater mains, fire hydrants, catch basins, street lights, street trees, sidewalks, signs. All of these are capital items that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when they will need to be replaced. They all have different useful lives and they all will eventually need to be replaced. And all these residences that are paying taxes, their taxes should go towards funding the ultimate replacement of the capital assets related to these subdivisions. So growth is great, but it does come at a cost as well. Next, moving forward, just looking at the useful life of the asset, which is partially controllable, as I mentioned. So this here's another chart from the Ontario guidelines for creating asset management plans. And I think it's a really good chart. It shows the gray line is if you do not do any maintenance on an asset, over 30 years to replace an asset could be $60 million. With regular maintenance on a road, crack sealing and eventual mill and pave and whatnot, if you do that a couple times, it prolongs the useful life. So if you look at this chart, over a 65-year period, you're going to pay $10 million in maintenance every 15 years, and you'll have to replace the asset once, versus doing nothing and replacing full reconstruction twice. You're going to save $20 million in that period of time. So it is important to inspect and maintain our assets, whether it be roads, infrastructure, vehicles, regular maintenance. It does make a large difference and saves us money ultimately. Again, some examples: street sweeping, catch basin cleaning, crack sealing, mill and pave, regular vehicle maintenance, regular mechanical inspections and repairs on our vehicles and our buildings. regular inspections are big too. If we look at some items we can't see, they're underneath the ground. If we inspect our storm sewers on a regular basis and catch at the beginning an issue that might be happening near the catch basin, we can go in and repair that small portion of pipe instead of letting it go and it expanding amongst the whole sewer line and costing a lot more money. So it is important to inspect as well as repair on a regular basis. It definitely saves money long-term and prolongs the useful life of these assets. So moving along, where does LaSalle compare? That's always a good question that's asked. So this here chart outlines kind of how far along the useful life of our assets are. If you look at the net book value, which is the remaining life, divided by the original cost, that's how much of the useful life's left. If you divide the accumulated amortization by the original cost, that's how much has been used. So LaSalle on average, we've used about 38% of the useful life of the asset, which is good news. We're pretty much in the first third of the life of our asset. That gives us more time to build up this funding to eventually replace our assets. Versus some municipalities, if you're over 50 to 60% of the useful life, there is a lot less time to get that funding in place. Those assets are going to start to fail a lot quicker in a shorter timeline than the town of LaSalle. We're a fairly new municipality with a lot of the growth happening in the past 20 to 30 years. So we do have, the good news is we do have time to continue to build this funding. The provincial average, we're pretty much in line with that. There's been a lot of growth in some of the bigger cities over the past number of years. Look at Milton, they've tripled in size in the past 20 years. But with our neighboring municipalities, we're one of the lower, one of the lower municipalities that have used up less of a useful life of our assets. Another good comparator is where we stand and how much money we put away in our reserve balances. As you can see, like excluding the city of Windsor and the county of Essex, which are much larger, looking at the regional municipalities and some of the other comparables that are comparable in household and population size, our reserve and reserve fund balances are much higher. Now those are our balances. If we go and reconstruct Malden Road, our reserve balances are going to go down, but we are continually building up our capital reserves, and those are really healthy right now. And we're going to continue to build those up as part of this plan and maintain the health. That's our goal. Next, moving into the capital plan moving forward, our long-term capital planning principles. So what we're proposing, there's not much that's different from the previous financial plan. We're looking at moving forward after 2022 is proposing a dedicating 2% tax rate increase annually until the target is achieved. That's no different than the last year's capital plan. Now, obviously, if things change and different priorities happen, it's still subject to budget approval every year, but this is our plan to work towards. New funding sources to be dedicated to capital. If we get new grants or formula-based grants, one-time grants, dedicated gas tax funding like we did the other year, even recapture, dedicating that to capital funding in our reserves. Priority and focus on maintaining and replacement of existing assets beyond the capital goals and objectives that are in place right now, such as the waterfront. Rather than moving on with more capital related service level increases above and beyond what we've already started, trying to dedicate the funding to replacing our existing assets. Again, as debt is eliminated in 2028, the Vollmer debt will be paid off, reallocating that funding to replace capital, specifically the buildings. As they start to age, this building, it's every year it gets a year older, and there could start to be some problems or mechanical issues, HVAC replacements or roof repair, major roof repairs and rehabilitation and whatnot. And then last is continuing to build up our annual monthly fixed fee under water and wastewater, which we've been doing the past number of years, increasing it by $1 per month each year. So those are our goals. So if we are successful in rolling those out from 2022 to 2027, our funding from taxes will increase by about $4 million. Our funding from water rates and wastewater rates will each increase about $500,000. We don't know what our senior level of government funding increases will be at this point in time, but funding from all sources will be about a $5 million increase, which will get us to a lot closer. It'll get us to just over $19 million, which is a lot closer to that current $21.2 million goal. So we'll continue on as we have the past 5 years, and hopefully next time Tano and I present the same presentation in 5 years from now, we can maintain the success that we've had over the past 5 years. And then now, what if we do nothing? What if we discontinue our putting money towards capital? What will happen? We're going to push the snowball down the road. It's going to get bigger. It will require future higher tax rate increases. They might be required. You know, instead of the 2% a year we're looking at, it could be 3 or 4% a year that will be forced to pay once our assets do start failing into the future and reach the end of their useful life. Service levels may decrease. You know, the roads may become bumpier. There may be more flooding around town. There may be more water main breaks. Asset replacement may not occur as required. Annual maintenance costs may increase. We may be required, you know, if we're not replacing our vehicles within an appropriate amount of time, if we don't have the funding available, we're going to spend more money on other maintenance related items. So that's the end of the capital financial report and the 5-year capital plan. If there is any questions that members of council have, I'd be happy to answer those at this point in time.
Council members, if there are any questions, don't raise your hand because I can't see everyone. So just speak up and we'll go from there.
If I may have a question for Dale.
Okay, Jeff.
Dale, you know, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, we started putting away that increased amount for capital planning of 600,000. Last 2 years, we've downplayed it to help keep the tax rate favorable. I'm just curious if we, you know, your presentation has been fantastic so far, and it really does paint a picture. And the biggest fear is going to be in what happens with this inflationary rate that we all see is running out of control. And for all the good work that's been done, it's not going to be enough. I'm just curious if a quick scratch pad calculation can be made. If you were to restore that 600,000, what does that make our overall tax rate look like?
So it would be, so that's an additional 300,000. It'd be about another 0.8%, give or take.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No other questions. I'm just going to make a comment to Dale. Don't bring up more flooding, worse roads, more water main breaks. You sound like our past chief of fire. He was always Debbie Downer. So I don't want to hear any of that at budgets.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to move on to the departmental budgets. I'll share that. Oh, okay. Tano's going to start sharing his screen now. He's the IT issues have been sorted out. He's got everything under control.
So mayor, members of council, we'll start with the departmental presentations. We'll begin with the mayor and council's budget, which the treasurer will give an update on that, and then we'll move to department head by department head based on the budget book schedule. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There really is not much to report under mayor and council. There's actually a small decrease in the budget. It's under wages and benefits, and that's more related to per diem costs. Even before COVID hit, the per diem budget wasn't being hit. So we've taken that into account and reduced it accordingly, which is very minimal in the grand scheme of things. So there really isn't much of a change over the prior year under the mayor and council. Next, I'm going to move to our chief administrative officer. So basically for each department, we're going to talk about the 2021 goals, give a status update, and then talk about our 2022 goals. And then if there is a budget, we'll move forward and talk about our operating and capital budgets. I'll turn it over to Mr. Militia.
Thank you. Again, as part of the budget presentation, you'll note that on the slides that are being presented right on the bottom corner, the bottom right-hand corner, there is a reference to the budget document page. So if council and the viewing audience would like to turn to page 52 in the budget document, if they have a paper copy or are following along electronically, you will get more detail in each budget as we go through. With respect to the CAO's office, as council's aware, the CAO area is charged with the general management of the entire administrative focus of the municipality. In terms of the 2021 goals and objectives, I think the overarching commentary that I would provide, aside from that has been detailed on page 53 of the budget, is that 2021 has been a challenging year as we've continued to deal with the pandemic conditions and I would say the roller coaster, if I will, in terms of the amount of changes that have been implemented and then further changes and then further changes in terms of those directions. That's not to be critical of the directions being put out by the province or the local health unit. They are dealing with a quickly evolving situation and implementing changes as they need to, and we're just dealing with them. And so we've had to go through that process. And so that has been the underpin of a lot of the strategic areas or focus that we've had through the CAO's office and even through the department head and senior management team. With respect to a number of the projects, again, we've got of the projects that you see there, we are on the verge of completing the organizational structure review. We have just hired our last vacant director position, so we seem to be well set into the new year as we move into that new structure that we have. Folks, we have backfilled a lot of the individuals that have either been promoted or have retired through the organization. So we've had we have that positive role that we seem to be on at this point. And in January, we'll be at full complement, and that's a positive thing as we move forward. Again, of the items that were identified as goals and objectives in 2021, there are two items that were deferred just because of the amount of COVID activity that we were going through. And certainly that is the development of the talent management program in conjunction with the Human Resources Department, getting that department up to speed in terms of the amount of staff, and the backfilling of staff took a little longer than expected. And again, looking at the service delivery model and community survey, that was also deferred as we were looking at improving and enhancing our strategy engagement portfolio and getting that up to speed. And that didn't come on stream until late in the year. So those are things that will be pushed forward into 2022. Again, the other goals, many of the goals that are identified as part of the chief administrative officer's portfolio are things that usually span beyond one particular year. And so some of these projects are ongoing as we go through. In terms of the goals for 2022, and again, those can be found on page 54 of the budget. The talent management program, again, is in the priority in terms of developing and starting to develop that. We expect that program, again, will be starting to be should be rolled out, rolled out later in the year of 2022 and will continue on into 2023. Again, we've got a number of where we were hoping, again, at the time of writing the report, that we would develop a pandemic exit strategy and a return to new normal. We had anticipated that would be happening early in the year at the writing of the budget back in October. Obviously, that's no longer the case. That will be deferred. And again, our timing on that was supposed to be in the first quarter. Hopefully, we'll be in a position to entertain that in the second or third quarter of 2022. Although I would expect that, given what we're hearing, we can expect to have some level of pandemic conditions all the way through 2022. In terms of the service delivery model review, again, looking at what is our service delivery model under our new normal. And that is something that we intend on going through in terms of 2022 and into 2023 and doing a complete review of how we deliver services. Certainly, we've moved more into the virtual and online environment, and that again a bit by force and by choice. Certainly, the pandemic has pushed us in that area. We were already moving in that direction, but they certainly give us a quick shove in that direction, if I will. And so, I think from that perspective, we will continue to go through that and review that in 2022 and into 2023. One of the goals that we've established is to really increase our relationship with senior members, senior levels of government, and certainly our local community groups as well. Looking at there's a number of master plans and environmental assessments that are underway and just the general oversight of that. And the last one is to really take a look at the strategic plan, review where we are with that, and particularly with respect to the new pandemic conditions and how as we come through that and look at providing council with a review and an update of that late in the year. So those are the goals and objectives for 2021 and 2022. I don't know if there's any other questions from council at this point. I'd be happy to answer those. I don't see any hands up going up on that. So thank you for that. And I believe at this point we'll be going to corporate revenue, which will be handled by Mr. Langlois.
Okay, moving along to corporate revenue. There are primarily two larger items that make up the inflationary changes. We did touch on them earlier in the presentation. The first being the supplemental levy increase. We are increasing that by $290,000 to get it to $900,000. That the actual figures over the past 2 years have been slightly, actually just slightly less than $900,000. So this is bringing us right up to actual and where we should be. Just on that note, this is the last year that we will be able to increase this to help with our tax rate. The second item is our surplus of $150,000 that we've budgeted. Again, every year there's vacancies as we replace positions. It takes time to go through the interview process and whatnot and replace them. And historically, over the past number of years, we have had some surpluses. So we have budgeted for a small surplus to help maintain a lower tax rate as well. Next, moving to the Finance and Administration's 2021 goals and objectives status update. So the first, to develop a Municipal Act Part 12 charge policy. That's currently in process. It's going, as we investigated, it is going a little bit further than just the Part 12 charge. It also is going to take into account local improvement charges. So basically it's addressing when there is a resident request for example, for a new sidewalk that isn't in our plan. And, sometimes it isn't as simple as just building a sidewalk. There's storm sewers that need to be constructed as a result as well. And, if it is not in our plan to fund, the funding needs to come from somewhere. So this will give residents the option to basically, if they get enough signatures, to pay for it, the residents along that road to pay for it. And, the municipality will probably pitch in some money and pay for a portion of it, but Given that it may not be a priority item, this gives an avenue, if there is that much demand for it, to construct some of these requests and be funded directly or even over a number of years by the residents. So that's currently in progress and it'll continue into 2022. Asset management plan phase 1 of the new requirements. So this has been postponed and delayed by the provincial government. It is now due July 1st, 2022. However, it is well underway. We haven't completed yet. There's a whole study being done. We were successful in receiving a grant, so Public Sector Digest is helping us with that. There's another grant that we've applied for, and they may actually complete the entire plan for us. If we're successful, we should find that out soon, but it is due July of 2022. So that goal is continuing on. And, you know, even once we're done phase 1, phase 2, we're going to start on right away. Continuous improvement. As we've seen from this presentation, our asset management plan is important. And the more accurate we can have that plan, the better to see where we stand and where we need to go. Community engagement with the property assessment update. So as mentioned at yesterday's council meeting and earlier in today's presentation, MPAC has announced that the assessment values will not change for 2023 and 2024. With that being said, as we find out more information, we will communicate that to council and the public, but at this point in time, it is going to remain consistent. We will communicate that out. So as we find out more details, we'll definitely communicate that out, and that's going to remain a goal moving forward. Last, the HST review. That has not been started. We have met with some consultants to discuss that. The last time we had it done was probably about 6 years ago, and basically the consultant will come in and look at areas of potential savings where we might be overpaying HST if there's some kind of credit that qualifies, and then we can retro us back 4 years and get that savings. There's been some competing priorities recently, which we'll go through. So that has been delayed, and that's part of the 2022 goals and objectives as well. So above and beyond that, the 2022 goals and objectives, in addition to what I've just mentioned, we have our budget software implementation, which is a really significantly large project. What that's going to do is make everything automatic. We do everything in Excel spreadsheets, and when there's a change, we have to go in and change all the spreadsheets and whatnot. This is going to make it more automatic. It's going to link right to our financial software and update everything accordingly. It's going to help us with our capital plans, and everything, once approved and changed, it'll flow through the system automatically. It'll create a lot of efficiencies and allow us to utilize our human resources in more effective manners in different areas. So that will be started in January. So just to elaborate a little bit, I did want to talk about some of the some other accomplishments that the Finance Administration Department, which includes IT, it's a huge part of our department, that we've completed. So online, as Mr. Militia mentioned, we've been implementing a lot of virtual services. So I'm going to list some of those. Online property tax and utility bills, those are now available online where they weren't in the past. Municipal ticketing, the AMPS program, residents can pay those online. We're actually looking at implementing that with council services. She'll probably mention that during her presentation, but some more areas where we can pay for different services online. Our pet licensing module, our IT department assisted with that. That allows residents to purchase dog tags online. Our new website, our IT department assisted Mrs. Hodre with that implementation, which is now fully accessible. It was accessible before, but we brought it up to the new requirements. Our e-bids and tenders software, another big accomplishment, is rolling out the procurement function. That's been great. Our procurement officer has been really helpful with all the departments in controlling and placing the bids and making sure we're following all the rules and everything and the legal requirements. So that's been tremendous. Electronic funds transfers. In the fall of 2022, we implemented that. So we've actually, in the past couple of months since we've rolled it out, we've paid 2,000 payments through EFTs. And, you know, that saved us significant money. We've previously had to print and mail out checks. So we've had to pay for the envelopes. We had to pay for the stamps and the postage and whatnot. So, you know, if we extrapolate that to a full year, we're probably going to save over $10,000, which is great. And, you know, it's also, our vendors get paid faster. So it's kind of a win-win. Our electronic invoice approval system is currently in progress. There's been some bumps along the way that are kind of out of our control, but we're working through those. As I mentioned, the new budget software that's going to be implemented early in the new year. There's building permit software that's being rolled out. That's going to allow the building division to receive and process permits electronically, which is going to, again, create efficiencies. Our new intranet, I don't know if you've had a chance to check that out, but that's been rolled out in the past year. And then last, just integration of software. That was part of a grant that we received. And rather than inputting data into two different sets of software, having potential for manual input errors, some of those functions are going to be automatic now, which again creates efficiencies and allows us to utilize resources in other areas. So those are just kind of above and beyond the goals of the department that we've rolled out over the past year. So moving on to the actual operating budget, the inflationary changes, again, that's wages and benefits. A large portion of that is for all various departments, but it's just included in the finance and admin budget. There is also 2% that I mentioned on build up for inflation on our capital reserves and whatnot. And then there is within the IT department, there is some licensing for fees on new software that's included in that number there. Under service level changes, again, our annual contribution to long-term capital financing, that has been reduced by 50% the past 2 years, but it still has increased by $300,000. And then our master plan build up, again, that's $300,000. That's going towards the waterfront right now. It's going to help with our debt payments as we roll out some of the projects, which I'll talk about shortly. And it's also going to help with some of the operating costs once we get that event center up and running. So that has also been reduced the past number of years. I think the original goal was to have $400,000 allocated last year. It's $200,000 increase. This year is a little bit higher, 300,000. But again, that has been reduced. So with reductions come other challenges. So next, there is a report for council on the waterfront debt issuance. So we are looking at issuing the debt early in the new year. With inflation comes increases in interest rates. The prime rate hasn't increased at this point in time, but we expect it to. And interest rates, look, I check out the Infrastructure Ontario website weekly. Rates are starting to creep up. So it is time. It will save us money if we know we're going to need to issue this debt. We're going to issue it shortly in the new year. Right now, I checked this morning, I think it's a 2.78%. So earlier in the year, it was around 2.3. It's crept up to 2.78. So it is time to issue that debt. We're going to issue the $7 million debt to be amortized over a 20-year period. And just looking for council's approval to move forward with the issuance of that debt. Again, we always go through Infrastructure Ontario. The local banks historically haven't even bid. They cannot compete with that. The rate it's different than a mortgage. It's locked in for the entire term. So you can't beat that 2.78%. It'd probably be double if we went with one of the big banks. So and then under our procurement policy and laws, we are not required to tender that out. With that, I don't know if council would like to pass the
Mr. Mayor, just at this point, I know this particular budget or a line item was the subject of a special report on page 5, I believe, of the agenda. So there is a recommendation. So I know it's within the budget, but I would also ask at this point that council consider the recommendation, which would be to approve the, sorry, got the wrong page number.
52.
52, sorry, not 5, it was page 52. Sorry about that. So there is a recommendation that is there as part of that report. So it would be an appropriate time to approve that recommendation should council see fit to do that at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Militia. You heard Mr. Longo say you can borrow at 2.78, unless I'm mistaken, prime is 2.45. So not many people can borrow at prime, but that is the prime rate, 2.45 for individuals wanting to borrow. So council's pleasure. We have a recommendation. Councillor Carrick, move. Question.
Yeah, no, I'll move the recommendation, and this is still within the 1.75 we're dealing with, correct?
Correct.
Okay, yep, I'll move it.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Carrick, support by Councillor Aditro Spagnolo. All in favor? Any discussion? Okay, that carries. Thank you. Sorry, I said that, asked it improperly, but okay, we're good to go. Mr. Longwa.
Okay, yeah, I just want to point out, subject to this budget's approval, the balance, the annual allocation for the waterfront will be really close to, it'll be $959,000 per year. And the annual debt payment will be approximately $467,000 a year. So we're well within what we've built up, and the difference there, that's going to be used to fund the future debt payments for that we're probably going to issue in the following year, the $5 million. And then also it'll be utilized for some of the operating costs once we start rolling out the event center when it's complete. But there will be a larger report on the waterfront tomorrow. So moving along, we'll move on to our council services department.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. So as you see before you, there are a few goals and objectives that Council Services undertook in 2021. And the first one listed there is the records retention project. That project will carry over into 2022. And what that project entailed was giving some general training to the various departments on what records retention means in terms of our obligations to collect, store, retain, retrieve, destroy their records. So almost all the departments have been trained to this point with respect to these obligations. And council services also undertook to prepare workflows and develop workflows with respect to documents that required, follow up or bring forwards in the future, so that we can track contracts, certificates of insurance, and any other documents, expiring bylaws, anything that requires follow up. So as you'll see in our 2022 goals and objectives, that project will continue into 2022. The second goal that we were focusing on was the municipal election. And again, that's another carryover project. I believe it was back at the end of, I think it was October, maybe beginning of November, council approved the electronic voting method. And I'll touch on where we're moving for 2022 in just a moment. Council services also improved our ability to accept delegation requests for the public, just to make it a little bit easier for members of the public to register as delegations or to submit written delegations for the council agenda. And so all of that now is electronic. It seems to be working really well. The public seems to have responded well to it and is utilizing it. And that's something obviously that will continue into 2022. A few other projects that aren't listed here that council services undertook in 2021 were an accessibility initiative with respect to the purchase of Able Docs. To date, all departments have been trained on this new software. And what this software allows us to do is it allows us to create accessible documents from the outset, and it enables us to make those documents accessible for posting on the web a little bit easier than what we were doing previously. So we will continue with that and assisting the departments in using those pieces of software. But everybody's been trained, so hopefully going forward, it'll make our lives a little bit easier from an accessibility standpoint in meeting our obligations under the AODA. The other initiative that Dale had mentioned that we undertook in 2021 was to put our dog tag licensing purchases online. So this will be the first year that that's fully rolled out. And we will continue with creating electronic forms and making applications available to the public, as you'll see in our 2022 goals and objectives that are listed there. So this will be the first year, and we had the assistance of the finance department and IT to make that happen. For 2022, I've already touched on the records retention, so I'm going to move on to the election. That is the biggest project that Council Services has for the 2022 calendar year. It's the most important project we have, and we have begun it. We expect to issue the RFP for our electronic election in January, hopefully within the first few weeks of January to get that ball rolling. We'll be also working on developing a communication plan and working with our communications department to get the word out to the public, not only with respect to registering to make sure that they're on the voters list, but to understand how to go through the electronic election, the platform, the software that we will be utilizing, and also so that they know when voting is open and all the other pieces of information that go along all the various dates, such as nomination day for prospective candidates and our elections help center. We will also be looking at the procedure bylaw and doing a comprehensive review of that. We expect that to be completed before the end of the second quarter next year. And part of that is just to include some of these provisions to allow for this post-COVID meeting procedures that we will be utilizing. We've been electronic now for a year and a half, and we want to codify some of that. The procedure bylaw has undergone numerous changes and amendments since it was last updated and revised. So we just want to clean it up, take a look at it, and present council with a revised procedure bylaw for consideration. The last project that we are going to be working on for 2022 is our AODA compliance and electronic forms and applications. And as you're all aware, our website is required to be fully compliant, and part of that is putting our forms and our applications on our website in a format that is AODA compliant and accessible to all individuals. So we'll be utilizing the assistance of IT and our finance department, as Dale alluded to put a lot of our applications, such as marriage applications or noise bylaw exemptions, FOI applications online, to make it a little bit easier for members of the public to apply for things through corporate services at any time of the day and at their convenience. And as you'll see, there are really no service level increases in our department this year. The increases are primarily related to budget and wage increases. So subject to any questions, that is what is happening in council services for the next 12 months.
Any questions from council members? Seeing none, we'll go on to human resources.
All right. So from the human resources perspective, the Human Resources Department provides some background and support for all of our various employees throughout the organization, including our public works, our Volmer complex, the town hall, fire department, police services. So we are actively engaged with a number of employees throughout the organization and such. In 2020, 2021, we were anticipating that we would have had a third person start with us during the first quarter of the year. However, those plans had changed due to some unforeseen events that took place, and we weren't able to establish a third person within human resources until the end of 2021, and so we are a little bit behind with accomplishing a number of our goals and objectives that were outlined. Also throughout 2021, given that we provide support to other areas of the organization, we were faced with dealing with situations of COVID that impacted the entire municipality, and we're busy reallocating staff to different areas within the organization in order to avoid as many or any layoffs of full-time staff members. So it took a bit of time and effort to be creative in assigning those employees and getting them set up in their new areas in order to continue their employment with the town in a proactive manner. As far as the goals and objectives for 2021, on the scorecard there, the opportunity for employee engagement survey was delayed as due to competing priorities. So that has been delayed until the new year. A number of our employee training initiatives that we were hoping to engage and take part in were also pushed back as a result of COVID. It was challenging to be able to organize such events for the corporation, as there were a number of different factors and changing as to how events were held and taking place. So I think the new normal is probably going to be much like we're doing today, more on the videos side of things. So we will need to adjust and see how we can best support the organization in that regard. Also within 2021, the town was successful in completing contract negotiations with our fire association. So that was one of our bargaining units that we were able to have finalized through our police services. There are some initial discussions taking place with some matters regarding contract negotiations and how to move forward from that area. Our QP negotiations will probably take place early next year, and we'll be able to move forward with both our QP 701 and 701.1 probably later in the year, and initiate and the goals to finalize those contract negotiations as soon as possible as well. Within upcoming 2022, so I've already kind of touched on the employee engagement survey and investigating that. Contract negotiations will take place, the employee training. We've also commenced the initial stages of working through a wage review for our non-union group in order to remain competitive within the market. The town has been challenged, and I know a number of other municipalities and employers have equally been challenged in attracting and retaining talent. And one of those components is that's obviously of importance is competitive wages. So we are undertaking another review of our non-union wages in order to ensure that we are competitive within the market. And we hope to have those results back probably by the end of January of 2022, and before council shortly thereafter, perhaps early February. The electronic performance evaluation initiative is to transform our performance management process from a paper-based system to an electronic system utilizing our existing technologies. So there are some project work to be completed, and that will be built onto our current Chronos system, or has now been renamed UKG. And also, along with that will be an electronic talent acquisition software. So with that software, it is online software to integrate also within our UKG system and be able to provide some assistance with onboarding, job postings, electronic measurement of and streamlining of how we go about advertising and recruiting for the organization. So we are looking to make some changes within that area as well. As I was looking back at some of the other activities that were taking place in 2021, there were, I did a rough count of the number of people that were either transitioned from position to position or new recruits. And there's approximately 40 offer letters that we had completed for the organization. And that's probably one of the most substantial areas of focus that we've had during the pandemic, was reallocating staff, obtaining temporary staff members for maternity leaves, as may be the case, and really backfilling a number of senior management staff members, as the CIO had already spoken to. So with that recruitment of talent, that is certainly a very time-consuming process that was undertaken, and probably the vast majority of that was performed by my colleague, Mr. Mamek, and he was certainly actively engaged in completing a number of those tasks. Also, with some of the reduced staffing levels that we've been trying to maintain throughout the town and at Town Hall, it required the two individuals in human resources to be work alternating days. So there was also a separation of duties that took place during that period of time, where we had to really rely on one another in order to be able to move the organization, or keep it moving forward with what was taking place. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is more of the budgetary items. Again, there's not much with respect to inflationary changes. The primary changes associated with this are wages and benefits, and also a increase of approximately $20,000 for legal expenses that to try and bring our current cost budget more in line with our current costs. So there was an increase in that area. And as far as service level changes, there are none that would impact the budget. As far as capital enhancements, there's $30,000 that have been allocated for the workforce management software, which fits in with the two previous goals and objectives established for 2022, which is the performance evaluation initiative and the talent acquisition software. So there is a cost to add those modules onto our existing system, and that money has been set aside from previous years and is covered in reserves. So if there's any questions, I'm certainly available to answer them.
You're good, Rick. I don't see any questions. We'll go on to strategy engagement.
Thank you, Mayor Bondi. Mayor Bondi and Council, I welcome you to the new Strategy and Engagement Department. So the objectives of this department will be strategic planning, engagement and communication, government affairs, economic development, and tourism. Just looking back a bit at 2021 through communication was a very busy time, a lot of pivoting and changes, being sure that we were following closely the directives of public health and sharing that with our community. Of course, sharing the COVID message, COVID protocols, in making sure that our community was aware of our virtual programs and services as they all came on board, welcoming people back safely multiple times throughout the year as things opened and shut down again, and reintroduction of events such as holiday lights, well as still ensuring that COVID protocols were a part of those messaging for our community. Some of the other initiatives that we started last year in 2021 was the launch of Play Speak, which is our community engagement program, software program. We did launch 7 projects last year. We had a combined total of over 11,000 views of those projects and almost 800 new connections through those projects. So that gives us the ability to be able to provide email updates to anybody who's interested in those projects going forward. We will continue to use this platform even when in-person consultations can take place, because it does offer another option for community involvement for people who perhaps can't attend or are not interested in attending, but can look at the project on their own timeline. Last year in June, we also relaunched our website, the town website, which was with great assistance from all of the municipal departments to ensure that their information was up to date, that they were sharing accurate information as well. That new website has given us improved navigation and search abilities and the responsive design for compatibility with all screen sizes. So if somebody is looking on their computer or their phone, the application is compatible with that and changes in size so that they can see the entire page. The third project last year, we did also launch our SharePoint intranet system, which gives us the ability to communicate more often with our internal staff, with our departments, to be able to share more information with them. It's a hub of documents, training videos, everything sits on that spot. So it makes it much easier for people to find that information, our internal staff. Looking towards 2022 goals and objectives. So the focus will be really on the development of this department, looking at the transition of the replacement for the position of the corporate communication promotions officer, reviewing and implementing the communication plan, as well as the strategic plan 2050, and looking at some review and implementation of the economic development plan as well. For a second goal, to strengthen the community's engagement with the town, to continue to research and implement methods of communication and finding innovative means to continue to engage the town going forward. With respect to the 2022 proposed budget, as this is a newly created department, the increases are inflationary and growth related due to wages and benefits. As I mentioned, one new position was created. The expenses, so wages, administrative expenses, and expenses related to strategic initiatives came from the finance and administration budget and have been reallocated to this department. And the 2021 budget has been adjusted to be able to compare to 2022 going forward. That is the end of my presentation for strategy and engagement. I don't know if there's any questions before I move into a bit of a presentation about our strategic plan.
Not seeing any, Ms. Hadri.
Okay, so council will remember in 2019 and into 2020, we did create an update to the town strategic plan, now called LaSalle 2050. So we did look at a new vision and a new mission and new value statements. Unfortunately, COVID hit right around the time that we approved this plan, so we haven't been able to do a lot to move it forward. Although you do see it on all council reports, it is included in everybody's goals and objectives going forward as well. But we do hope to make it a bit more visible going forward into 2022. So the proposed budget for the strategic plan for 2022 is $647,000. So this includes $257,000 for ongoing initiatives and $390,000 in one-time funding. I would like to note that funding has not changed in 2022, and we've held off any increases in the last 2 years due to COVID. We are planning for some increase in funding in the future years to be able to move our goals forward to meet the strategic goals. So the first goal, we are committed to enhancing organizational excellence. Included in the budget, you will see information about a citizen satisfaction survey, fundings for guest speakers, mentoring and training for staff. With respect to the second goal, that we will sustain strong public services and infrastructure. We are looking at how to build in funds for additional electric car charging stations, increased awareness for recycling and promotion of our transit LaSalle Route 25. With respect to our third goal, that we will strengthen the community's engagement with the town. We will be doing continued promotion and communications, looking at branding, big picture landscape projects, continuing with street pole banners. Those type of projects will be coming forward. With the fourth goal, looking to grow and diversify our local economy. This is where we are looking at a community improvement exercise, which would start in 2022 and then extend into future years with future budget considerations for incentives for our community. And with respect to the final goal, that we will build on our high quality of life. We are looking at the completion of the Highway 401 gateway signs, which we started a couple of years ago. We do have some updates to do as well to the Vollmer Complex wayfaring signs. As new amenities are being added on at the Vollmer, we will be updating those signs to ensure that people can find the location to those. We are intending to bring a report to council in early 2022 that details the strategic planning budget along with projects for the next 5 years. So LaSalle 2050 is really assisting us in managing change to make decisions and to meet our long-term vision, priorities, and strategic actions. That's the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Councillor Carrick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Don. Don, just a quick question. Where would the potential future LBA fit into what your department?
Sure. So that's part of the economic development strategic plan that we had done a few years ago. So we will be bringing that out, pulling that out and looking at that. We have been building some relationships with a lot of the business community as well. So within the next couple of years, that's definitely something we'll be looking at.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go into planning, building, and property.
Your Worship and members of council, with respect to the new Department of Planning, Building and Property, this is a transition from DSI as a result of the corporate reorganization that took place earlier this year. So there will be a new director that was announced this morning that she will be joining the town in January to lead the new Department of Planning, Building and Property. With respect to 2021, there were two major objectives during that period, both of which have been completed. The preparation of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw was adopted by council and is now in full force and effect for the community to build on the work that was done with respect to the new official plan. In terms of the other 2021 goal, that is in relation to undertaking a study that the department completed to identify strategies and how the town could go about meeting the PPS requirements as it pertains to shovel-ready building lots. The province requires the town to have a strategy to ensure that there's at least a 3-year supply of shovel-ready residential building lots that are serviced and ready to go, and an available supply to meet the future demand over the next 10 to 15 years. So this report was completed with staff resources and was presented to council, and it identifies all of the opportunities that exist and what infrastructure upgrades are needed in certain areas for lands to move forward to the actual approval and development stage, and what additional studies in some of the greenfield areas that still need to be undertaken for those lands to come on board. With respect to the 2022 goals, there are two that have been identified for the new department. Mr. Langlois spoke to one of them earlier. Staff in this department are going to be working, and that work's already started, with respect to creating and implementing a new electronic permitting system. So funding was received to assist in that regard, to get the necessary hardware and software in place, and to train staff moving forward to ensure that now there is a way for the clients, builders, landowners, residents of the community to file applications for building services electronically, and to do inspections and to keep records in a more streamlined fashion. The second goal for 2022 is to start working on the secondary plan for the Greenfield area in concert with the master drainage study that is being undertaken in the public works area. So for 2022, this will be probably something that'll be started towards the second or third quarter of the year, where a terms of reference will be put together to look at that exercise. That's probably a 12 to 24 month exercise going forward to look at establishing that secondary plan for that area. In terms of the operating budget itself, as a result of the changes to the new department, there is going to be a reduction in the overall budget of approximately 5% from 2021 to 2022. And most of that is with respect to the area of wages and benefits. And I'm available for any questions.
Any questions for planning? Will you be here tomorrow as well, Mr. Solani?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll go to Public Works. Thank you.
Good morning still, Your Worship and members of council. I'm pleased to present the Public Works 2022 departmental budget. We'll start with our 2021 goals. The first one listed is the Malden Road environmental assessment and detailed design. So under the direction of Mr. Mara, the environmental assessment was completed. Detailed design hasn't begun yet, but that will be one of our 2022 goals. And I believe Mr. Mara will be speaking more to Malden Road tomorrow morning with a report. Then we have the Front Road Storm Study. This was the DMAF grant that we got. So the environmental assessment has begun with Stantec. We worked through the Public Information Center. Their work, background work and investigation and modeling, and some of that is ongoing and will continue into 2022, and that environmental assessment will also continue into 2022. Drainage concerns in various locations. The 2 points I'll talk about here is one, the Turkey Creek H&H study that's ongoing, being led by the Conservation Authority, but in partnership with Windsor and Tecumseh. Again, I believe Mr. Mara is headlining this and has an update on that that's coming in January, and this will continue into 2022. And the other big one would be the Howard Buford Master Drainage Study, and again, Mr. Mara will be updating us on that, but it's on hold, as you know, with the Turkey Creek study having to get mostly completed before we get back into the Howard Buford study. Our tree maintenance policy was completed by Mr. Beggs and presented to council not too long ago. Our 2022 goals. I don't know if the presentation is going to go back up or not.
apparently we just had a bit of a technical glitch at this point. So I'm wondering if perhaps we can just break for lunch. I apologize, Mr. Osborne, for cutting you off right in the middle of the
No problem.
presentation, but if we could just break for lunch at this point, it might give us a little bit of time to reset the computers and figure out what's going on here. Yeah, I think the gods are upset because we didn't increase the IT budget to the degree that perhaps they wanted to. So we're struggling with a bit of IT issues in the last couple of days, but we'll work through those over the lunch period here and be back. I just want to looking to Mr. Ferraro in terms of how long for lunch. Is an hour an appropriate time? The mayor's never used to taking an hour for lunch, so why don't we say 45 minutes for lunch, and we'll be back around 12:45, if that's okay with everyone on the screen. Just for those watching online, we will be pausing the YouTube broadcast at this point, and then restarting the new broadcast as a new clip in the new year. So, or sorry, in the when we come back from lunch. So for now, again, we'll be back at 12:45. Thank you very much, everyone.